Everybody. Welcome. I'll let everybody get back to their devices here for a second. I'm sure some of you are stepped away. All right. So this Ask Me Anything. I'm Ty. I'm open to questions about pretty much anything for the most part. I'll give you a brief background about myself here in a second, but you can either throw your questions down in the chat, or you can just unmute your mic and speak out loud as you have them. But these are the general topics I think are most useful for everybody. And so if you have super specific questions, depending on how many questions we're getting, I might not have time to answer super specific things, but more general broad questions, I should be able to get to all of them. Just a little bit of a background about myself. I went to Brigham Young University. I studied exercise science and I graduated in May of 2023. And now I'm a dental student at Harvard. I just finished my first year and I'm about to start my second year. I studied for the DAT using DAT boot camp pretty exclusively for about 6 weeks, and I did well with that. This is a little bit about my cycle, just really quick. I applied to 11 total schools.
Hi, we can't see your screen if you're on number 4 where it
Oh,
should
really?
be. We still just see the title.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, resume. It's not working when I'm hitting resume share. Let me try this again. Erica, it's not letting me, it's just giving me like the resume share when I
No
open it.
worries. I can do it for you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No worries. Let me pull it up.
Sorry, everybody. Jessica, yeah, so 6 weeks. I would recommend like 8 weeks if you can fit that in. I just had a work obligation for I worked every summer between school to help pay for school. And so I had to start. So I had to expedite my study schedule a little bit. But as a result, I didn't get to take as many of the full length practice exams as I would have liked. But it is very doable. It was not fun though. Okay. So yeah, so this is my cycle. I have my DAT score sheet breakdown over there. These are the 11 schools I applied to. I am also married, so a big focus for my wife and I is weather. We tried to apply to schools where there was no snow in the winter. The only exceptions were the University of Utah, which was our state school, and then Harvard. And ironically enough, I'm at Harvard where it snows a lot in the winter. And then I separated the 4 Texas schools down at the bottom because I applied to those through TMD-SAS, which is a little bit of a separate portal. And I have this kind of janky little, I guess, key to the left over here, kind of describing what each of these logos are trying to represent for each of these schools. But I have in bold the main takeaways that I applied to 11. I had 10 interview invites. I only ended up interviewing at 8 of those schools, and then I was accepted to 6 of those schools. The 2 schools I interviewed at that I was not admitted to were Midwestern and UT San Antonio. I feel like that's some of the background about me. Generally, people like to know, but if you guys have any other specific questions about me or about the application cycle, I think I'd be happy to hop into that now. my volunteering activity. So I started volunteering when I started undergrad with a program that helped sixth graders around the area I was in. And we focused on sixth graders who had struggling backgrounds. And so there's a lot of different challenges. Some of them, were homeless. Some of them had parents who weren't in the picture. Some had siblings who were involved in gangs. And so we just basically helped them out with that. It was a really fulfilling thing. We helped them with like their schoolwork, and we're really trying to be just positive mentors for them. And I did that through all 4 years of undergrad. And then I also was involved with it was Maji. It was a service group a buddy of mine actually started, and that one we did local service activities like quarterly, and then we tried to do an international trip each year. So we did that, and then I served a mission for my church for 2 years before I began undergrad. And so you may have noticed I had a lot of volunteering hours. A lot of that came from 2 years I spent doing almost exclusively volunteer work prior to starting undergrad. How early did you apply in the cycle? So I applied to 10 schools on June 1st, right when the cycle opened my year. The one school I didn't apply to early on was Harvard. I had no interest in going there. And then I did a mock interview that they had sent out on one of the like DAT Facebook groups. And the student I interviewed with encouraged me to apply. And so I did, mostly for fun, just because I thought it'd be fun to interview there. And then when I got an interview invite, and then as I did some more research, it became a more appealing school to me. So that's why I'm here. But I applied to Harvard at the end of July 25th. What resources did you use to study for the DAT? I only used DAT boot camp. I guess the only exception to that would be like very occasionally, like probably fewer than 3 times, I went on YouTube for a subject I was really struggling with or needed clarity on. I had 6 weeks of focused study time, so of only studying, and then I tried to start studying during my spring semester, or at BYU they call it winter semester, which is confusing, but it was from January to April. I got boot camp and started to study, but I only got through about 10 days worth of content over the course of the whole semester. So then I had, after that, 6 weeks of dedicated study time prior to my test date. Prepping for interviews. Good question, Sonny. I think a really important thing with that is just being able to articulate yourself. So prior to my interviews, I would just ask myself, I had Googled like common dental school interview questions, and I would basically go through those and ask myself out loud those questions. For me, for whatever reason, I just like to do it in the shower just because I was alone, and so it wasn't as embarrassing to like talk out loud about random things. But I'll just try to ask myself the random questions I could remember that were hard for me to answer, and then I would say them out loud. And so that was one skill that helped me just become a little bit more articulate and comfortable answering basic things that you can expect to get asked. And then importantly for individual schools, I would really recommend going on like Student Doctor Network or Reddit and just trying to read around about those schools and see the kind of questions you get asked or other applicants are getting asked. And the last thing is just like research the school you're interviewing at. If you applied there, I hope you are genuinely interested in going there. I know that's not always the case, but hopefully that is the case. So as you do some research on like the school website, you can be familiar with some of the specific aspects of that school. And you can also get some of this info, through Reddit and SDN, Student Doctor Network. I think you can even reach out to schools, or not schools, but students. You can find their social media. And most students are pretty receptive, willing to help you out. And so I think those combination of things will make you very prepared for your interviews. Do you consider mid-August late to submit applications? As far as timeline for application goes, I would say there's kind of three categories your timeline can fall on. It's applying early, which is advantageous for your application. There's applying like on time, I guess we'll say, which is just neutral to your application. And then there's late, which is detrimental to your application. I would say mid-August is probably towards the latter end of like neutral, approaching like the detrimental timeline for applying. And when I say detrimental, that doesn't mean you're not going to get in if you apply at this time. It just means the road might be a little steeper than it would have been had you applied earlier, given the same application. Why did you choose Harvard? What are the strengths and weaknesses of Harvard's combined dental and medical curriculum? So good question. That type of question, just while I'm on it, is a good, like, this is the type of thing as you're doing research about a school, preparing for interviews would be a good thing to like know. Like Harvard, for example, this is a unique thing about them. So knowing that going in is a good thing to prepare for. I ended up choosing Harvard because when I interviewed here, I was just really impressed with the students and the faculty. They were all super kind. The faculty knew a lot more about my application than most of the other schools. Like, so I just felt like it wasn't a general interview. I felt like they were interviewing me. And the students were more relaxed and less stressed by my perception than other students at other schools I had interviewed at. And Harvard has a pass-fail curriculum as well. So there's no class rank, no grades. And for me, that was important because I'm really interested in specializing specifically in oral surgery. And so the medical curriculum also is helpful for doing that. So those combination of factors is why I ended up deciding to come here, despite my wife and I swearing off snow. So you can count volunteering hours from before undergrad. So I would say be careful with that. Like I did, but it wasn't like high school volunteering hours. I'd say most schools don't like to see anything from high school for the most part, unless it's like a super significant thing and it's been pretty longitudinal. Mine was a little unique in that it was like, instead of basically doing gap years between undergrad and dental school, I did gap years between high school and undergrad. And so that's why I counted it. And it was something I referenced in like my personal statement and, you know, in my interviews, I mentioned some of my experiences as a missionary as well. So basically it was pretty integral to my application. Otherwise, I would say I would be, unless it's really a big part of your application, and it's been longitudinal, I would refrain from it, especially if it was during high school. Two questions, but I wanted to use my microphone if this is acceptable. All right, Kimberly, why don't you ask your question if you're still here?
Hi, I am still here. Nice to meet you. Um,
Hello.
First question that I had was, what would you say is too long of basically getting your story? So I applied this cycle and I'm submitting my application by August the 30th. So I'm glad that you answered that question with it kind of being like at the neutral part.
Yeah.
So I'm starting on my personal statement. I know the first paragraph is supposed to basically bring the readers in, reel them in, a story that kind of made you want to be a dentist. So my thing is that I have a lot of scenarios that has happened in my life. So when do I stop adding that storyline? Because I'm on my second paragraph and I don't want it to keep making it a run-on sentence or just keep talking about the negative. Like I want to get to the good, but I don't know like where to stop.
Good question. I'm just going to reiterate it for everyone as well. And I heard you just fine, but just want to make sure everybody can. The question is basically with a personal statement, how much info should I give them about like why dentistry? Like, do I share all these experiences I have, or do I just share a couple of them? Does that sound about right, Kimberly? Is that your question, more or less?
Yeah.
Okay. So great question. I think the biggest thing is everybody's with personal statements, they are, as they sound, quite personal. And I think a big important thing with them is you want to be unique. And obviously you don't want to be, you know, solely trying to be unique. But with that, I think oftentimes it's wise to just pick out your most powerful stories. So just sharing from personal experience, in my personal statement, I was able to share like really like two-ish stories and then relate them to each other and to white dentistry. I had like a third element that related to like an activity I was part of, but not so much a story. Getting more than that, I would say, is generally going to be really difficult to weave together in a way that's super compelling. So I would recommend overall, when you're crafting your personal statement, to choose not even this might sound counterintuitive, but not necessarily the two biggest things that had an impact on your white dentistry, but I would say the two most compelling things. And the difference is to like a third party, which is going to sound the best. And so those might be the same for people. I think oftentimes it is, but I think you want to make that compelling, because with interviews, you also have, room to expand and elucidate on white dentistry. You don't have to just repeat the same things that are in your personal statement. So because of that, I think it's really important to make sure your personal statement is like you said, interesting, and it's going to hook the reader really quickly. And so I think choosing compelling things as to white dentistry should kind of outweigh like more powerful if they are different, if that makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I definitely wrote this down. And then my last question was, I have 110 volunteer hours separate from my shadowing hours. Is that enough? But I'm in grad school too. So I'm just a little confused because I am in grad school for health sciences. So I don't know if that falls differently for grad students.
Good question. I think generally they expect like a similar amount of volunteering for all applicants. Obviously they do take nuance into consideration. So it'd be difficult for me to say like, yes, that's enough, or no, that's not enough. I would say in general, like 100-ish is probably the like towards the lower end of what you want. So it's enough, I think, to get you considered and get you in. If you can bolster those up, great. If not, I would apply and, see how things go. And if you end up having to reapply, just volunteer more throughout the course of the year, basically.
Okay. So the volunteer hours like is more important than the shadowing, or?
I would say shadowing hours are more of a box check than volunteering. And so what I mean by that is once you get to like 150-ish shadowing hours, I think unless you personally are enjoying shadowing, and this goes for everybody, if you are shadowing because you want to learn more, great, after 150 hours. If you're doing it to build your application, I would say there's a lot better things you could be doing than shadowing additionally, one of them being volunteering. I think volunteering is more impressive, like the more you have, the better, whereas shadowing's kind of like, yeah, the more the better, but like around 150-ish, like it's kind of a box to check, because the reason schools want you to shadow is so that you're familiar with the profession you're getting into and that you'll graduate their program basically, because you knew what you were getting into. So it's less about showing them, oh my gosh, I've seen all this stuff, more about you're familiar enough.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Any tips for secondaries? I think overall, just make sure that you're writing things in a compelling way. People like to read compelling statements, whether it's, a small or big question. And then if it's school specific, take time to do a little bit of research so that you're not just giving a general, you want to, not that this is bad, but everyone's going to say they want to help people and work with their hands. So if you can say why you like a specific school in secondaries, if it's relevant to their questions, that's good. Did you mention wanting to specialize in all your interviews? No, I almost mentioned it in none of them, really. When I was asked, I would just say something along the lines of, I'm not really sure. I just want to keep my doors open and be as successful as possible. The exception was Harvard. I don't know how, I can't speak to every school. I got the sense during my preparation that it's kind of taboo to want to specialize on the interview trail. For one, you're so young in the process, and for two, these schools are training general dentists. Harvard has I don't know if a different approach is the right way to say it, but they historically, a lot of their class specializes. And so I knew that it wouldn't be a negative for me to say anything. So I kind of with them was a little bit more forthcoming. Is it true that you should consider Harvard only if you like research but not lab? No, I don't like research at all. I didn't actually do any research in undergrad. And I really like Harvard. I would come here again. So take that for what you will. For your personal statement, did you structure it more story-like, or was it just more informative of just like why you wanted to attend school, dental school? Mine was very story-like, and I would recommend doing that if you can, because it's more engaging to read as like an admissions committee perspective, which is who you want to appeal to. Because ultimately, like your paper application, if you will, is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting and your stats to getting you an interview. And then your interview, is where you can kind of impress and show them who you are more as a person and basically sell yourself, if you will.
Like, sorry, thank you for answering my
Yeah.
question. I just like had another question about it. So, like in the personal statement, so I know you said you kind of like structured it story like, but should
Mhm.
you be like mentioning some of like the accomplishments like you've done, I guess, through like for to go to dental school, or like things like related to that? Like, should you mention like maybe like your shadowing, or like just like maybe like any organizations you were involved in? Like, is that important?
Like if you're strategic about it, it's very great and good, but like at the end of the day, they're gonna see your AADSAS application where they see all that as
Mm-hmm.
well. So I think
Yeah.
like if you do it in a way that is like tactful and you relate it to your why dentistry well in like this narrative
Mm-hmm.
format, I think it's very helpful. But if
Okay.
it's just to like, show them or tell them an impressive thing you've done. I've read a lot of personal statements, and it's a common thing students do is they'll share like some impressive achievement or volunteering club they're a part of, which is fine. But if you do it in a way that just feels like, also, here's these awards I won, and I won them while I was volunteering, and I want to help people, like it's not as compelling than if you can basically say like, because of this, my involvement here, where I was fortunate to receive, X award, I
Mm-hmm.
realized I really needed to have a profession where I was helping others to find fulfillment. And then you
Mm-hmm.
can relate in the rest of your story. Through shadowing, I realized dentistry would offer just that.
Yeah. So,
So
oh, sorry, sorry,
go for
sorry to
it.
interrupt. No, so like, and then I know you were talking about like your specialties, and like you didn't really talk about it in your interviews. But so like throughout my personal statement, I was just kind of describing like why I wanted to specialize in like pediatric dentistry, like how one of my experiences like led me to wanting to like specialize in pediatric dentistry. Would you like advise against that as well, and like just keep it pretty general?
That's a good question. I think it just depends on, more than anything, like it's difficult to answer without reading your personal statement. It's the short answer.
Yeah.
The longer answer is like, if your personal statement's good, like with that, I would leave it. I wouldn't
Okay.
just change it for the sake of changing.
Okay. Thank you.
Marissa, DMD and DDS are the exact same. Well, obviously they're not the exact same, but there's no difference. It's not like medical school where there's MDs and DOs and there's like different curriculum. The curriculum for each school is the exact same, as far as what they're required by CODA, which is the accreditation organization, to teach us. And so, no, don't consider, it doesn't matter, and don't consider that. Did you take a gap year, and what are your thoughts on taking one? What should a student do during that time if they take one? I took 2 gap years, but I graduated from high school, and then I served a mission for my church full time for 2 years, and then I started undergrad. So my gap years were like right after high school, not after undergrad. But as far as my thoughts on taking one, um, I don't know that there is like a should or shouldn't answer to that. It's kind of personal to your situation. If you do want to do that, I would say just continue, assuming dental school is the end goal, continue doing things that will help you get to dental school. So either volunteering or get a job as a dental assistant, or do research. Like I said, I didn't do research, but just do something to bolster your application, assuming you're taking a gap year and want to go to dental school. Can you shadow other specialties in dentistry as well, or should majority of the hours come from general dentists? I shadowed specialists as well. I would say yes, the majority of your hours should come from general dentists, but for sure, feel free to shadow specialists, and I think you should, because it was pretty informative for me and helping me understand what I was interested in. Would working as a dental assistant over 800 hours in a general dentist's office offset a lower amount of shadowing hours, about 60 hours? That's a great question. If it were up to me, I would say yes. Every admissions board's a little different. Some schools have like a strict minimum shadowing hours, which doesn't make sense if you have 800 hours working as an assistant, because obviously you're familiar with the profession. But overall, I would say the best thing you could do is reach out to like schools you're applying to. You can find like admissions emails and send, be brief with it. They're really busy during admission season, but hey, I'm very interested in your program. I was curious to understand your school's view on shadowing hours. I worked for over 800 hours at general dentist, but only have 60 shadowing hours. And then, yeah, is that okay? Or do I need more shadowing hours? Would you recommend submitting your application even if you're planning on retaking the DAT? Is it better to just get it in earlier? So with that, if you're retaking the DAT, and you inform schools that you're retaking the DAT, they're just not even going to consider your application complete until they get your retake score. So submitting it earlier doesn't do much. The only thing it would do is when you submit your first application on AADSAS, that puts you in the queue to get your transcripts verified. So that's the only thing that it would benefit, which that varies. Mine was pretty quick turnaround, like 4 days or something like that, but they say like give them up to 2 weeks. I would say generally it doesn't take 2 weeks though. If you just submit your application and don't tell them you're retaking the DAT, basically the risk you run is with some schools, and this varies by program, but I've had peers and friends who were in this situation and applied, and then they didn't tell them because they didn't want their application to be like labeled incomplete. But then when they did submit their new DAT score, the application had already been considered. And so some schools won't reconsider you because you already applied. They looked at it despite having like a new and improved DAT score. Frustrating, and it's hard to say because every school does it a little bit differently. There's not like a guideline or set of rules they have to follow. So overall, would you recommend? I would say it depends on your timeline as well, like your flexibility with applying for the next application cycle if you don't get in. Overall, I think like a conservative approach would be, if you really you're concerned and want to get it in as early as possible, you could submit one application and get your transcripts verified, and then you can retake your DAT and kind of go from there. But that's a question. I tried to give you the general ideas, but that's a very individual question for what you should do in your situation. It's a hard one to answer generally. Why isn't pediatric dentistry considered general dentistry, especially since there's such a need? Good question. I'm not sure. They kind of do general dentistry the same, but they just happen to work with a younger patient population on average. All right. This is my coaching site. I don't see any more questions. You can reach me on Leland if you would like to get any personal tutoring or personal coaching with your application. Because you were attending this Ask Me Anything, you're also going to get a 20% off code right there. You can feel free to take a screenshot and use it. And I'm going to throw, or you have my profile link right here, actually, to the right. So if you guys have more questions I wasn't able to get to, feel free to shoot me a message on Leland and I'll, get back to you when I see those messages. Real quickly, I just saw a few more questions I'll answer. Do they make you take OChem classes in dental school? No OChem classes in dental school so far. Would an above average DAT offset an average or below average GPA? It depends how well your DAT or how above average your DAT score is and how low your GPA is. But overall, like a higher DAT is a high DAT, low GPA is better than like a high GPA, low DAT, because the DAT is standardized. And so the whole point of it is to compare across schools. Gap year. I'm sorry, Kayathi. I'm probably butchering your name. I apologize. Feel free to message me on Leland. I'll get to that. And then Jessica, last question. I would say a withdrawal does not affect you a lot if it's just one isolated withdrawal. If you have like a history and a pattern of having withdrawals repeatedly, like that probably will negatively affect you. All right, guys. Thank you all for coming and doing my Ask Me Anything. Like I said, if you have questions I couldn't get to, feel free to scan this QR code and shoot me a message on there. And my major is exercise science, Marissa. All right. Good night, everybody.